Chief Dan Christman has been with the Mount Vernon Police Department for a little over a year and a half, coming to us after serving as a police chief in the city of Selah over in eastern Washington. Today in the roll call room, we'll be discussing how things are going, his journey into policing, as well as tackling the biggest issues facing police today in Mount Vernon and beyond. Chief, thanks for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So a year and a half already. How's things been going for you?
You know, I often get that same question, and the answer is always the same. I think it's going really well. I always try to check the pulse with the people around me, but we seem to be in a pretty good place, and we keep getting better. And so that's my barometer, and I'll continue to make little course changes, and we certainly can talk about that. But I'm happy. I'm very happy. Yeah.
Good. We are too.
Good.
So after learning all about Mount Vernon Police Department for the last year and a half, what do you think are maybe some of the things that you're most proud of with the department?
You know, I honestly, some of the things that I am the most proud of are the things that were here when I got here. The iOS program, the volunteers in policing, the Citizens Academy, or what we're now calling the Community Academy. The fact that our patrol officers are so dedicated to our community, that they believe in engaging with our community. You know, as you know, we've got neighborhood officers who are solving problems on the ground level, and I think all of those programs are worth maintaining and moving forward and getting them even better. We've stood up a traffic unit this year, super proud of that unit, and we're going to continue to grow that because I really believe it makes our community a safer place. Our numbers have dropped as far as collisions, injuries, those sort of things. There's a lot of education going on and some enforcement, obviously, but it's making a difference.
Good to hear. So it's great to hear that all those programs that were in place before you came here are doing well. One of the things I've appreciated about you, though, is coming in and saying, why have we done this way? And then, is that still the best way of doing things? Sometimes yes, sometimes maybe no, and we need to look at, going forward a little more. Yeah. Is there anything that you've come in and seen a need for change?
There have been a couple of what I call sort of course corrections. You'll recall, and because I know you and I had this conversation too, was there's no bad response to why do we do that, except for that's the way we've always done it.
Right.
And so I've asked everybody here, if that's your response, then really the correct response is, I don't know. I don't know why we do that, Chief. Yeah. And so as you said, the follow-up question from me is always going to be, do you think there's a better way to do it? And I always ask those questions to the people who are actually doing the job. I'm not on the street anymore much, and so I would not advise any of my peers to try to make a suggestion to fix something in a specific way, but actually rely on the content experts. Sure. And so everybody here has been open to that, which has been great. We had some report writing issues. We had some workflow issues. We had some policy, what I thought were policy issues. And when I asked those questions, I heard, I don't know. I don't know why we've done that way. And so we've made those corrections, and I'm really happy. The change is hard.
It is. Always.
Change is hard, especially in policing, as you know.
Yeah.
But here, people have gotten over that obstacle, and they're a lot more willing to at least talk about things.
Yeah. One of the things you kind of mentioned in there was policy.
Yeah.
And we've, for the last year or so, been working on changing how we do policy.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, in police agencies, as you know, there really are two different kinds of policies. We call in-house or organic policies, written by the people inside this building. We rely on legal staff to help us along that way, but once it's written, what often happens is it gets put on a shelf, and there's not a lot of updates to it. Although laws change and procedures change, and our policies should also follow and change as well. The other option for police agencies is to have a company that actually focuses on police policies, has attorneys on staff who watch all of the district courts, all of the appeals courts, and even our 9th District Court, which controls so much of how we do business as a police department. Watch the changes coming out of those entities and then updating our policy when they happen. So like real-time changes. And so that's the way we've moved to actually a pay-for service, to have them keep our policy updated. Every time that happens, of course, our officers get a notification that there's been a change. Here's the change. And it could be a few words. It could be a couple of paragraphs. But it's all based on actions within the courts. And so I'm really happy about that. It keeps our folks informed and, doing the right thing all the time.
Right. And like you said, having that organic policy is kind of tough. Having been a part of policy writing, so many things change so quickly in the courts. And so to try to keep up on that, to make sure our officers have the most current, has been difficult.
Yes, absolutely. I hope we talk about staffing because we've been understaffed. And you have to really have somebody who's dedicated to that. Literally a 40-hour job in some weeks, and then tending to the policy and tending to it. And we haven't been able to provide that person, whoever that person would have been, because we put our folks out on the street where our community, I believe our community wants to see their police department.
Yeah. You mentioned staffing, so let's talk about it.
Well,
staffing is something that's facing police departments all across the nation. So how are we doing staffing-wise here at MVPD?
We want to do better. We want to do so much better. And, I've been talking to our council for the last year, even before that, really. Let me give you some ideas here, some thoughts,
Please.
some statistics. Washington State is 51st in the nation for staffing their police departments.
That seems bad.
It's not good. The top of the list is number 1, bottom of the list, 51 because we include Washington, D.C. There's 50 states and Washington, D.C. We're below all of them, right? We're 51. So some historical perspective, most police departments in the nation average about 1.5 officers per thousand.
Okay.
That's been the past. In today's terms, they are averaging about 2.5 officers per thousand. Today, the Mount Vernon Police Department has 1.2 officers per thousand, our population, less than half of the national average. Now, there's some discussion out there, is that a good staffing matrix? No, not necessarily. But it is something that people can grab onto and go, okay, how do we compare with other police departments? I remember telling council that the city of Burlington has about 8,900 people in that city, and they have 24 police officers assigned to patrol. We have 36,000 people in our city, and we have 24 police officers assigned to patrol.
And have for a number of years.
I've gone back to 1996 to data from the Washington Association of Police Chiefs and Sheriffs, what we call WASPIC. And I can go back to 1996. We had 46 total commissioned police officers, and that includes the newest hire to the chief of police. Anybody you see wearing a uniform from the Mount Vernon Police Department is within that rank, that number, that 46. That's what we have today. Well, actually today we've just recently added one new position from the levy lid lift. So that's good. But did it make a significant difference? No.
Yeah. And we have hired staff, just not police officers. You mentioned iOS earlier. We're up to 6 people in that unit, which is awesome. They're doing so much great work in the community with our social workers and our nurse.
Yeah.
But actually, staff police officer wise, we remain the same as we did 30 years ago.
Correct.
So you mentioned the levy lid lift.
Yeah.
Recently, the voters in Mount Vernon approved that. Yeah. And so what does that mean for us at Mount Vernon PD?
What it means for us, very simple terms, is we get 6 new police positions police officer positions. We get one officer per year for the next 6 years. As I said, we just opened up recruitment for that one officer for 2026. We'll open up another recruitment in 2027, 28, all the way to 2031. But let me put that in perspective too for our listeners. Today we have 1.2 officers per thousand. In 2031, if that's all we add are those 6 officers, we'll be at about 1.35 officers per thousand.
Still pretty low.
Very, very low. Still, almost half of what the national average is for police forces across the U.S.
Right. We just opened that position now.
We did.
That doesn't mean we don't have other vacancies. I think as of filming today, we've got 3 vacancies plus a new one for 4.
Yeah.
So how has that impacted operations over the past couple of years, being down that many people?
Yeah, great question. When I got here, as you know, a lot of our specialty assignment positions were vacated to backfill the vacancies in patrol.
Right.
And so our proactive policing team, our traffic unit, those had all been vacated. When our K-9 officer retired, they didn't backfill that position. Those are all before me, and those are decisions that were made. And so we're just sort of trying to recover some of that. Today, we have those 3 vacancies from last year, but we have people in the pipeline, and we will be filling those positions relatively soon, probably within the first quarter of this year. And then we have the new position. Right. And so we'll be filling that position simultaneously with those other 3. What I think is important to keep in mind is that to get a police officer from the recruitment phase to working solo in a police car takes about a year.
Tell me more.
So it takes us the better part of between 2 and 3 months from starting recruitment to actually getting somebody in the door. And that's not because we're dragging our feet. It's because of mandates from the state that we have to put them through a series of testing protocols, psychological backgrounds take a long time. In some cases, it takes our background investigators out of state to go look at somebody who's looking at us as they'd like to move here from another state. We also have medical examinations, suitability for employment examinations. And so all those things take time. And then it takes us anywhere from 1 to 6 months to get a seat in the academy.
Just into the academy.
Just to get them in the door at the academy. Now that doesn't mean that we can't use them in the meantime, but we can't use them as a police officer. Right? We don't put a uniform on them and a gun and we tell them just go out and do the best job you can do without any training. So we get them in the police academy, and now our police academies are running about 4 months now.
Right.
So now, we're way out. And then when you get out of the police academy, then you come back to us and you spend, on an average, about 4.5 months in field training. That's where the new officer, the student officer, is now assigned to a veteran officer, and they work side by side in a car together, in the field together, in the office together, and that veteran officer oversees all the things that they're doing and gives them course corrections along the way and just sets them up for success.
Sure.
Then we get them out after they graduate from that field training session. They get them out as a solo officer operating alone in a car, responding to calls for service, 911 calls, things like that. But that takes about a year.
It does. It's a long time. And that 4 months of field training, we call it FTO, field training officer period. It's necessary because they get the basics in the academy, but then to come out and learn Mount Vernon PD policy and geography is always a big one. We've got a big city.
We do.
And it's important for an officer to be able to know where that address is that I have to go to, or if something happens in front of me, I need to know right now where I am.
Yeah.
So if I need help, I can get other officers. And I remember during my FTO period, my FTO was big on geography. I remember driving around, and he would stomp on the brake in the middle of the night. Where are you? And so I knew I had to learn geography really well,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
wanted to be right.
Right.
You know, both for him, but then also if something happened, I wanted to be able to tell the other officers where I were to get the help
Yeah.
that was needed.
You bet.
As we get back up to staffing, how do you see those new officers deployed? You mentioned we were down specific positions.
Yeah.
So how do you see them moving into our deployment strategy?
That is a discussion that I have almost daily with myself and with other lieutenants in the department as well. Like, what is the priority? The priority for me had been to get the traffic unit up and running. We have 2 traffic officers right now assigned to a motorcycle. Each of them have their own. They don't ride double.
No. That'll look kind of funny.
It would look, yeah. Although I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Yeah.
But I want to get another officer in a car.
Okay.
And I want that
Why is
person to be highly trained in collision investigation.
I see.
And so it's really a lot easier to work out of a car because of the equipment that you need, tape measures and skid plates and, things, equipment, instruments to develop the coefficient of friction of the roadway, like how much resistance was there for the vehicle to slide to a stop or to slide to a collision, and how fast were they going. You can, through math and physics, you can calculate all that. And so we want somebody who's got the ability to use all of that math, physics, science to come up with a good evaluation of what's happened at a crash scene. Anyway, so that would be 3 people in that traffic unit. We've recently added parking enforcement to our department. Came from City Hall, that was moved over here. And so I see them as an active part of the traffic unit. The proactive policing team, very important, would like to get that back up and running. A team of people that go out and look for problem spots. Look for places that we know there needs to be drug interdiction. Work with the task forces. Do things to get in front of crime instead of us chasing the crime and having to deal with our victims.
Right.
We have replaced, as you know, a school resource officer this year. We want to get a very robust presence back into the schools, and so we'll have our one SRO is assigned to the high school right now, and we'll have this new SRO in the middle schools here in Mount Vernon. And I'm really excited about that. Having, we were both
Right.
school resource
Yep.
officers earlier in our careers,
Yeah.
and so I know you have a heart for that as well.
I do.
So I think there are other options down the road, but for me right now, number one, get patrol completely staffed so that there aren't big holes there. People aren't being burnt out, working shift after shift after shift. For a while now, we've our ability to send somebody to training has been hindered by not having enough people on patrol. We want to make sure that if someone was sick or injured and they're out for a prolonged period, we still have enough people to respond to the basic calls for service that come in every single day.
Right. Yeah, lots of great positions out there. All that talk about traffic and the math, exactly why I'm not a traffic officer.
I saw a little bead of sweat come down.
You did. You talked about traffic and being a former school resource officer. Now, getting into the profession wasn't necessarily for you as traditional as, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to major in criminal justice, I'm going to come out and jump right into being a police officer. Walk us through a little bit about how you became a police officer.
I'm not sure you have enough time. I took the most atypical route to get to this place. It worked for me, I would tell you. I was a college student at Bellevue College. I had aspirations of going into nursing.
Okay.
And so I was taking all the classes, to get ready to go into that program. And, I went home one night and I turned on the TV and I saw a TV show that a lot of people probably won't even recognize, but it was called Quincy. And Jack Klugman, who was the actor, was the Los Angeles County coroner. And he had a sidekick named Sam who did all the lab work, and they went out and did a bunch of death investigations. And I remember just being so intrigued. I really enjoyed the idea of investigations. Was really excited about medicine, and here I saw an opportunity to a marriage between investigating incidents and medicine. And so I remember going to school the next day, and I met with my career counselor, and I said, I saw this TV show, is this real or is this fiction, Right. And he said, no, actually, in fact, King County has one of the premier medical examiners offices in the nation. And he said, if it really is something that interests you, you should think about going down and seeking an internship. Sure. And I did. I went down, I knocked on the door, they let me in. I guess that was the first step. I met with a guy named Bill Haglund, who was the chief investigator. And we talked for a couple hours, and at the end I remember him saying, so I want to make sure I understand this. You want to work here for free.
Yeah, great.
And I said, yeah, I think that's right. I get credit, so it's not free, but it's free for you, right? And he said, you're hired. And he said, let me show you where you can put your coat. And, we walked through a door and through another door, and he points at the rack, and he goes, you can hang your jacket up here. And I hung my jacket up, and when I turned around, I was in the morgue. Okay. And I saw a lot of things, that I'll never unsee.
I bet.
And he took me back through, and we went to a back room, and there were, I remember a cooler, and there were ream boxes, and he brought these boxes down. He goes, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to, since you've had some anatomy and physiology and some nursing training, I want you to reassemble these skeletal remains. Wow. And so that was my job for a while, was working on reassembling these remains, and then Bill and I would go through them and look for anything that would appear to be knife marks or tool marks or bullet, injury marks to the bones. And what I didn't know at the time, ultimately I would find out, is a lot of these were the Green River victims and others. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So my little brush with, a big case came early in my career.
Sure did.
I spent 15 years as a death investigator, investigated about 6,000 death scenes in my career, developed expertise in bloodstain pattern analysis, was picked up by the Department of Justice to do training for them, traveled around the U.S., and I consider myself to be very, very fortunate to have those opportunities to train law enforcement from all over the country and even out of our country. International students came to some of that training. But at one point, I was working on a homicide with an agency on the east side, Bothell, and the detective said to me, why aren't you a cop? and I said, because I'm this is my job. Right. And he said, yeah, but you've trained us, you work with us all the time, we have a great relationship. And so I often have said, the work that I was doing was kind of a dead-end job, no pun intended. But you are an investigator when you come in the door, and you're an investigator when you go out, unless you want to become a doctor. I didn't want to become a doctor at that age. And so I put in for a few positions, and one of them being Bothell. And I was, there were 300 people there testing for one position, and to my great fortune, I know, wouldn't that be nice? But to my good fortune, they picked me, and I worked in the city of Bothell for 14 years as a police officer, started out as a patrol officer like everybody else, was promoted to sergeant. In about 2014, I got a phone call from Snohomish County. They were having some issues with their medical examiner's office, asked me to look at it. I did that, went up and talked to them, and then put together a strategic plan for them. And ultimately, they asked me to come up and run that. And so I left policing for a year, went to Snohomish County, ran their medical examiner's office. I knew that I wanted to go back into policing. And so when I was done with that project, that's when I started looking for another opportunity. it led me over to Yakima County, as you mentioned early on. I was the number 2 operations commander, the number 2 in the office at Sunnyside, which is situated, for those who don't know, down in the lower Yakima Valley. It is 95% Hispanic population that lives in that area, very migrant, agricultural community, and it was a great police department. You know, we did a lot of good things as far as community engagement and changing the culture. When I got down there, there was a lot of drive-by shootings, a lot of violence, stabbings, a lot of gang-related issues, and not really by my doing, but by the officers on the street. All that crime started to dwindle, diminished, which was awesome.
Yeah.
You know, so in 2019, some of our listeners may remember Initiative 940. Which was widespread police reform. And just as a side note, I remember there were a lot of people that were at grocery stores. Hey, would you sign this petition for Initiative 940? And a lot of the selling point on this was it'll give police officers more training. And so, I mean,
good.
Who's going to say no to that, right? We want well-trained police officers. And I remember being at home one night, and my mom called me, and she says, "Hey, I signed a petition for you today." And I said, "Really? What was that?" And she told me, and I said, "Oh, Mom, I wish that was all that petition was for, but thanks, but you know." Initiative 940 was overwhelmingly voted in by Washington State voters. They wanted our police officers to get more training, but many of them wanted our policing reformed. And so I got a phone call from the state, and they said, you know, you've been pretty active in state trying to facilitate change. You've got your foot on the west side of the mountains, and now you have your foot on the east side of the mountains, so you've got connections on both sides. Would you consider coming and running that program? And so once again, you know, I left policing, and so became the program manager for that. Traveled around the state, met with law enforcement, met with community members, met with really angry people. Remember what we said earlier, people don't like change?
Indeed.
Yeah, so imagine walking into a police department and saying, I'm here to talk to you about reforming policing in Washington State.
I bet you got a lot of this.
I got even, I couldn't see their face because they turned around.
Wow.
But you know, most of them listened, and that was good. So I did that for a couple of years. Okay. Then I went back to SELA, took the chief's job there, was there for 4 years, and then, lucky for me, this position came open. Yeah. So I've been here a year and a half, and as I said earlier, very, very happy to be here.
Great. A couple of those places along those stops I want to talk a little bit more about, because our careers have crossed paths a couple of times.
Yeah.
We ended up in DARE school together to go teach kids drug and violence prevention. And then again, when you were teaching a bloodstain pattern analysis class that I got to be a student in. Yeah. Love that class. Tell us a little bit about bloodstain and what an investigator can learn at a scene from blood.
Yeah. I remember way back in the day, you know, blood was just something you walked around.
Sure.
You know, and I don't think people really recognize the value of it. But blood spatter has a mathematic formula to it. And so depending on how it hits a target surface, you can actually use a string and bring it back to its origin or an area where it originated from. Okay. And so that can be used to either refute or confirm a witness, suspect, victim story. Like, where was I at the time that bloodletting occurred? Or where was the person at who did that, who created that blood spatter, right? So, you know, many of our suspects in the violent crimes aren't completely truthful. Sure. And so this is a very scientific and mathematic-based evaluation of a scene, a piece of evidence in a scene that can help bring clarity to what happened, how it happened, and when it happened.
Okay. So you're studying all this stain that's in a room. So it sounds like you're kind of like Dexter without the whole serial killer part.
I was going to say, yeah, I haven't entered that realm, but yeah, I was in a court, in a trial one time, and the prosecutor at the time said, you know, I did a little bit of research on you, and one of the people I talked to said that you're a blood whisperer. and I said, I have never whispered to blood, nor has it spoken to me, other than I have walked into a room, and it is a weird thing. I just got to a place where I could see the blood and have almost an immediate understanding of basically where people were at, and where an event took place, where it started, and ultimately where it may have ended. And so I think it's just because of the exposure that I had to blood stains, working in the medical examiner's office, and as you can imagine, you know, there's a lot of exposure to that. Then working in the police department and doing criminal investigations, you certainly get a fair amount of exposure to that. Got a lot of training. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't just like, you know, in my core I understood. No, I went to a basic 40-hour class. I went to advanced 40-hour classes. I even went up to Canada, to Toronto, to the university up there, and took a physics class on property physics, just related to fluid dynamics. You know, so there's a lot of training, obviously, and I often will tell people, and you probably remember me saying this in your class, but it's kind of like riding a bicycle. You know, the more you use it, the more proficient you are, and and honestly, you can lose the skill and you know, tip over on your bike.
For sure. One of the things I remember from class is, you know, measuring the stain and running those strings, and then having to do a mathematical formula to then bring it out into the room. And so we were doing all that math, and then at the end you're like, oh yeah, here's how you do it. The button you push on the calculator. And we're like, really? This whole week, and now you tell us that? So, but I guess it taught us how to really do it and understand it. By doing it that way. So.
Well, you understand my purpose.
I do. We mentioned in the intro, there's some pretty important things going on, not just here in Mount Vernon, but nationally when it comes to things like immigration and things like automated license plate readers. And when it came to immigration, you came out very early on here locally about what the Mount Vernon Police Department's stance is when it comes to immigration enforcement. Share a little bit about that, again, what your message is to the public.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up. I was early. I put out a letter to our community, and I made it very clear that our police department wasn't going to participate in rounding up our community members. I also made it very clear that, you know, we were going to continue to do the things that we had been doing for the last 30 years that I'm aware of. You know, we have relationships with federal agencies, have for many years. We've had people on task forces and working side by side with them. But what I couldn't get behind is just rounding up people because they fit a certain profile, they looked a certain way, their skin was a certain color. And but the flip side to that, and I think the piece that got lost in the message, is if you're a criminal, if you're operating in our city as a criminal, we're coming at you hot and hard. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, it doesn't matter where you hailed from. You can't come to Mount Vernon and be a criminal and be protected.
Coming and victimizing our community.
Absolutely unacceptable, yes. And so when I sent my letter out, we got a lot of traction. It actually got national exposure. Never meant it for that. I meant it for our community to read. But I'm not ashamed of the fact that it got national attention. I will tell you that the first 2 weeks following that letter, I had death threats. I had phone messages. I had people who called me and actually got through to me and made it very clear that they were really unhappy with me. And I tried to talk to them. I tried to tell them that we're not really doing much different than what we're not acting any different than we ever have.
Right.
And rest assured again that if there's a crime, we're on it.
Right.
But that fell off, thankfully. And then I started getting letters and people stopping by the station, thanking me. And man, I'm telling you, that was a welcome salvation to death threats.
For sure.
I felt really guarded about my family.
Yeah.
Would I do it again? Yes, I would, because I thought it was the right thing to do then, and I think it's the right thing to do now. I watched the news this morning, and I was aghast. The shootings, the violence, to watch our nation be divided even further hurts me to the core.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah. So this is a hot topic issue. I know that there are going to be people that don't agree with me. I know there are going to be people that do agree with me. I've heard both sides, obviously, but I got to take a stand, and I did, and I will continue to.
Because the role of enforcing immigration violations is not one for local police to enforce.
We never have.
No.
We're not trained in federal law. I said this to somebody. ICE doesn't come into Mount Vernon and make traffic stops for speeding.
Right.
They don't respond to 911 calls because there's a prowler in the backyard. They don't come here and respond to domestic violence incidents, DUIs, thefts at grocery stores and department stores, because that's not what they do. Right? And likewise, our folks don't go out, canvass neighborhoods, grab people, ask them what their immigration status is. We've never done that ever. And we've not received any training in enforcing those federal laws.
Right. Because it doesn't matter, victim-wise. If you're a victim, you're a victim. It doesn't matter your nationality, the language you speak, where you came from, your status.
Yes.
If you're a victim, you're a victim.
Correct.
And so I was glad you came out with that early.
Thank you. And we have the Keep Washington Working Act, which actually I tell people now when we have these conversations, police officers can be decertified by the state of Washington. They will lose their job, lose their livelihood if they were to do anything like that, anything related to immigration enforcement, just because. Again, we can go after the criminal. That's not a problem.
Right.
But we can't go after somebody because they got here,
one way or another.
One way or another, however they got here.
Yeah. Similarly related to that, because it kind of weaves into it, but automated license plate readers. There's been a lot nationally about that and locally because of a ruling that recently came down from Skagit County. Mount Vernon does have, a lot of people will refer to them as flock cameras, which is a company that makes the automated license plate reader.
Yeah.
Talk about Mount Vernon and our usage of those cameras.
Yeah, last year we purchased 6 flock cameras. I want to be completely transparent about this. It's not like we have dozens of them out there. We have 6. And we have them on major ingress and egress points in our city.
So coming in and going out.
Exactly, yeah. And the reason for that is some crimes rely on mobility.
Sure.
Organized retail theft, assault, people trying to get away from a crime, homicide. There's a laundry list of crimes that are associated with that, with mobility. And oftentimes, as you know, we get a report of a crime, And when we ask them to describe the vehicle, they say, well, it's dark in color, and I think it was a four-door.
Right. Yeah.
And
Lots
so,
of those.
yeah. It matches a lot of descriptions.
Yeah.
There are a lot of vehicles out there. So with the Flock product, the Flock camera product, we can put dark four-door sedan. That could be blue or black or dark gray, but it'll filter all of the images of vehicles that match that description. Pickup truck, pickup with canopy, extended cab. You know, some descriptors can even get us tightened down even more. Now we put in a time frame. This crime occurred at 10 p.m. at night. So I'm going to bracket this from 9:30 to 10:30. Now I just have that 1 hour. I'm looking for a dark four-door sedan.
Right.
And that narrows the scope even more. And Flock will provide us a series of photographs of any dark four-door sedan during that time frame that were captured in the city of Mount Vernon.
Right.
And that gives our investigators leads to go to addresses based on the license plate. Doesn't tell us who the person is,
No.
just tell us who the car is.
Right.
And then we have success story after success story. I just talked to counsel about this the other night. I picked out, I think, about 20 success stories of the number of success stories that we've had.
Here in town.
Here in Mount Vernon.
Share some of those.
We actually realized the power of this technology back in 2024 before we even had Flock cameras. There was a young person who was taken, human trafficking case to Michigan. We didn't have the cameras, nothing here, but as the vehicle went across the United States, it was picked up on Flock, and it led us to where that person was at, and we were able to recover her.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I was working in Sela, Yakima had Flock cameras, and they had a young child that was abducted on the street, pulled into a car, and the car took off. They immediately got an image of the vehicle, was able to zero in on the license plate, get it entered into their Flock cameras, and within about 30 or 45 minutes, I'm going to say within an hour, they had the person in custody, and the child recovered and back to their parents.
Yeah.
Those are powerful, powerful stories. We've had everything from a homicide in our city, the drive-by shooting up at the Chevron McDonald's area up there. Flock cameras were used to identify all the vehicles involved, which led us to contact, identify, and locate subjects from that shooting.
Right.
We've had graffiti cases where somebody saw a vehicle leave the area, and we were able to track that license plate and then link the graffiti vandalism to a person. We've had assaults, domestic violence incidents. We had a stabbing at a local funeral home cemetery. That Flock cameras were used to identify the vehicles involved. I mean, I could just go on and on and on about the power of this technology. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the fear of that technology.
Because there is that out there, and totally get it.
Yes, absolutely. Some of it is grounded in truth, and some of it is not. Early on, I started hearing, Big Brother's watching, they're tracking people, not cars. Not the case. And I know there will be people who say, I don't believe you, Chief, I don't believe you.
Sure.
And I don't know how to turn you around, but we do not use biometrics. The camera is not identifying bodies, people in the vehicle. It's focusing on mostly the rear license plate. It's the cameras are pointed at the direction that the vehicles are going away from us, so that we capture that rear plate, and that's the value for us. The other thing that worries me is that some departments have had data breaches from particularly federal agencies, Border Patrol, ICE. Here's what I told the council the other night. There wasn't a lot of discussion about flock cameras until October of 2025. And that's when the University of Washington issued their report based on public records requests they made to police departments across Washington state. And what they were looking for specifically was who was looking at your data. Who was looking at Mount Vernon Police Department's data? Bellevue Police Department, Spokane Police Department, Kennewick, Wenatchee, all points in between.
Right.
And what they found was a widespread breach of data. There were what they called rear door entry, side door entry, and front door entry. And what they meant by that was, in some cases, those federal agencies had reached out to police departments and said, can we have access to your data?
Okay.
And many of them said yes.
So we can choose who gets to see our data.
We can.
Okay.
I'm not sure how the side door works, but the back door is some secret dark thing where they were able to get in and squirrel into that data and then extract information from it.
Okay.
The UW report, if you look it up online, it's it's a public document. I was just looking at it the other day again on the internet. I just searched for UW human rights flock cameras, and it came right up.
Okay.
But you will read in there that there were 6 agencies in the state of Washington that had absolutely no data breach. And 2 of them were sheriff's offices, and I think 4 were police departments. We were one of those. We had no breach of data. So counsel asked me recently, why? How did we skirt that?
Yeah.
And I said it was because we set very tight parameters. We put guardrails in place, if you will. Mm-hmm. There are 2 places in the software program that you can exclude federal agencies or any agency outside of the state. Mm-hmm. And we chose those for a reason. You can make a request, as you mentioned. An agency can make a request to us, and we can either accept it or deny it.
Yeah.
We have accepted no requests from out-of-state agencies.
So just those in Washington State.
Correct.
Okay.
And all of us in Washington State operate under the Keep Washington Working Act, which excludes us or prohibits us from doing those things that everybody's concerned about with regards to immigration.
Right.
So we felt like we could trust some of those folks. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all that to say that we came out looking good.
Right.
Our data is safe, it's secure. Now, the place that it has a vulnerability probably is in the public records requests.
Yeah.
And that hopefully will get addressed in the legislative session that's starting up in a couple of weeks.
Right.
And I know there's some talk about a bill that will, I don't know how it's going to address it, but it'll address it.
Yeah.
Exclude it from public records requests, things like that.
Yeah. When it comes to flock too, there's, we get a stolen car in the city of Mount Vernon. We can enter that in there, and then if that car comes into Everett, Seattle, Yakima, officers there will get a flag that says, hey, there's a stolen car here, or an Amber Alert, or Silver Alert, or a missing Indigenous person alert.
Yep.
And so it sounds like it could help find vulnerable people, recover property from victims,
Yep.
and on and on and on. Indeed, those concerns, but lots of good things too. We talked earlier about staffing. With our staffing shortage, does flock, do cameras like this help offset that?
Yes. They don't replace police officers,
Definitely.
but they do provide us 24/7 eyes on our streets. Mm-hmm. They give us those real-time alerts, Amber Alerts, Silver Alerts, stolen vehicles, people of interest in violent crimes when they come through our city. Burlington had a stabbing last year, and we immediately put that license plate in for them, and we were waiting for that car to come through so that we could stop it. It did not come through our city, but it was in the system.
Okay.
So then if it goes through another city, since it's in the flock system, it'll bing that city if they have flock cameras. So yeah, truth to all that. Doesn't replace our officers, but it does. It is a force multiplier for us. I can't put an officer on the street and just say, watch this area. That's what you're going to do for the next week.
Right.
You know, you're going to watch this area.
Yeah.
But I can put a small camera with a solar panel to keep it recharged,
Right.
and it can watch that street into perpetuity.
Right. And we've talked about, our patrol staffing level. If we've got 4 officers working and we have a homicide, all those officers are going to be there. And so to be able to take somebody and put them on those ingress, egress points of the city to look for that dark colored car, or even if we have a license plate, take an officer, go sit there and wait for this car, maybe to come through. It leaves the rest of the city vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of good, understand the challenges, and
Yeah.
hopefully the legislature gets that worked out.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's just a phenomenal technology. I want to continue to use it, but I also, if our city leadership says no, I get it. I understand.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And ultimately it is up to them to weigh the different interests that are there.
Yep.
And make that decision. That's what they were elected to do.
Yes.
We just provide the information and they get to make that decision.
You bet.
So that's going to wrap up our episode for today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit subscribe and check out our Facebook and Instagram pages so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month right here in the Roll Call Room.